Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today again. And we're studying a brand new series where we're going to take you through some conversations around research. We realized that a lot of these topics are really hard to just put to pen and paper. So we've decided that it might be just so much easier to just talk about it. And then some parts and some nuances of these conversations are going to be useful to you guys, I hope. So today, Ali and I are going to be talking about one of our favorite topics, which is the differences between researching in different countries and researching internationally. So,
Yep.
Ali had joined us in Singapore a couple of years ago. What was the biggest difference when it came to working in research in Singapore and Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I think when I compare it to the United States versus working throughout Southeast Asia, the biggest difference was probably just research maturity with both the users and the stakeholders as well. I think in the United States and North America, even in a lot of European countries, it is best practices to do research. Consumers are aware that surveys are going to be sent to them, that they might be recruited for interviews. They're constantly getting asked to give feedback on products. Singapore and Hong Kong, research is more established and more akin to what we do in the United States, for example. But if we think about places like Vietnam, running research there was a completely different experience. And I actually had to go through a lot of different learning processes, working with the stakeholders in our company, and then also with just recruiting, being in the interview, for example, like running surveys. There's a lot of issues with fake survey takers. There's a lot of issues in interviews with people just, if you hire a translator to be in there with you, they're having most of the conversation with the translator because they don't understand what's going on. So I think there's just a disconnect between companies traditionally running research and how they do it versus how it's done in the United States.
How much do you think language is a barrier? Because Southeast Asia is probably one of the most diverse in terms of culture and language.
We would hire translators, and sometimes they're either translating it literally, and so it doesn't make sense when you translate it into the other language, or the translator is translating it so that it makes more sense colloquially, but then you lose the original meaning of the question. So there's definitely a lot of issues running research in another language, especially like I mentioned in surveys, because you can't correct anything and you can't explain anything, but in interviews as well. I don't speak any of these languages, so it's up to the translator to be the one that's saying, well, this is what this means and this is what this person is saying, and you have to trust that this person is saying the right thing. So there's definitely a lot of issues with translations as well. I think you guys experienced that even in Hong Kong when you were running research.
Yeah, that's the most interesting thing was that based on market research and based on just general understanding of the market, you would say that between Hong Kong and Singapore there are a lot of cultural similarities, and it's probably the most similar across this region. And then we started running a bunch of little ads, and then the Hong Kongers just said that this makes absolutely no sense. And we started sending questions over, and then they were just this question makes no sense. The way you're translating it doesn't make any sense at all. It reads like Chinese, like Mandarin. And the reason was we started translating it ourselves into Mandarin and then basically switching it to traditional Chinese, hoping that that would just mean Cantonese. We hadn't realized that there was such a huge difference, right? And we realized by the time we got to Hong Kong and did field research that if we were conducting the interview entirely in English, they basically gave you one word answers. They weren't really giving you all the visceral details that you wanted. So when we got our translator who spoke Cantonese to translate a lot of it, they just started talking nonstop, and it was amazing because It's one of those things. And we do see the difference within even Singapore itself when you have a Singaporean who's
Yeah.
speaking a little bit of like, Singlish. You get a lot more
Yeah.
details out of the person because they feel a sense of like
Yeah.
connection. And I think that speaks to like how important it is that like research is conducted with like
The locals.
acknowledging and honoring like
Yeah.
cultural differences. I think that's the first thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm a white woman going and conducting. Let's talk about it's obvious. So, conducting research in a lot of different places, you can't go in with, you know, 3 white girls and hope to get great insights because a lot of times they just might hold back a little bit more. There is a balance of sometimes you do have to come in as like that alien from outer space. I don't understand the culture to ask why. But I think you also need to have some of the context so that you're getting the most out of the situation. Like I could interview very, very well in the United States because I know, I'm from the East Coast. I can relate with little tidbits and little like I understand a lot of that cultural relevance of they might say, well, there's a lot of traffic or the real estate in Boston is really bad. And I'm like, yeah, I understand. I don't need you to explain to me why that's bad because I understand that. Versus if we use Vietnam, for example, by the time we went into Vietnam, maybe like the third or fourth time, I think I had a very good understanding of, well, this is why, the police might pull them over if they don't have insurance, but they could just give them coffee money, for example. So this is why coffee money. This is why they're answering that way because that's the way that their society works. And in the first time I went in there, it was very naive where I didn't have that groundwork done. And so it was answering a lot of questions that to the interviewee seemed very stupid because they're like, hello, this is just the way life works. But we didn't know that.
Yeah, and I think that like, if you have unlimited amount of time, unlimited amount of resources, and the
Yeah.
ability to be in that culture and like really immerse yourself there,
Yeah.
that's like that's the best of all worlds, right?
Yes.
Like, but a lot of times, like field research is very expensive
Yeah.
and they're very time boxed. So you get things like do it in 5 days and then fly back, and then somehow or other on a daily basis distill all the insights and like
Yeah.
figure out what you're gonna do next, right? And like just sometimes being in location brings a lot of that like context to you. It's like
Yeah.
seeing how like the traffic is, seeing how like the people like live their daily lives. I think those things get lost
Yeah.
in a survey or even in just like secondary research. It's very hard to experience those things.
If you don't have a lot of that context beforehand and you don't localize your surveys to that culture, to whoever's answering it, to that language. If I'm running a survey from the United States in Hong Kong and the people, the like local stakeholders don't trust the results because I didn't create it the right way because I missed a lot of context, well, then that also creates mistrust between the stakeholders and myself as the researcher. So not only does it give us bad results, but it also then creates mistrust between me and my stakeholders. So how can Bellini Slushie help solve some of these cultural differences?
Absolutely. So it seems a little strange that
Yeah.
like we're just pummeling research by surveys here when we created an entire question bank for it.
Yeah.
So part of it is that like you have these things called screeners before a user interview, and these screeners require the participants to answer a set of questions, right? Um, and like these are usually demographic questions, and like that's why a bulk of our question banks are demographic questions because like part of it is that like, you will come across very, very silly if you put in income brackets that are completely out of like what the society even is, like not doing enough like secondary research to put together like options, right? That's why we've curated a lot of it within the question bank itself. Um,
Yeah.
that being said, it's like we understand that like, in a lot of these places where you're doing research, you're a one-man show, like tackling like 10 projects at the same time. You don't have the time to actually research a lot of this. So that's why we think that this resource here, open sourced and like community curated,
Yeah.
will be very, very useful for like loads of people, like including ourselves.
It was taking a lot of the learnings and a lot of the issues that we've experienced ourselves. And it was almost an epiphany at one point, being like, hey, we can't be the only people that are facing these issues. It's so we wanted to make sure that, okay, if we've figured out the right way to ask something, well, then maybe somebody can help us figure out the right way to ask this in Germany. Maybe somebody else can figure out the right way for us to ask this in Hong Kong. And this way, for the translation and the localization piece, especially, it becomes a very easy, like, this is what the question is in English. This is how I would ask it in the United States. But if I want to run it in Germany, I would ask it this way. So.
Yeah, and it's sort of like the entire idea is that it pains us like to see like really poorly written like surveys because like, honestly speaking, you're doing yourself a disservice, and
Yeah.
like a lot of like UX experts out there would tell you you're probably better off not running any of these because you're just harming yourself at this point in time. We disagree a little bit on that because you should. Every single company out there, whether you're an indie hacker, you're just a solo entrepreneur, or like, you're a big company, right? You should have the ability to like do research. Even if you might not have the resources to do it yet, but I believe that like we should empower people with the knowledge of like how to do these things. And this is just basic, and the way to push like UX research forward is by democratizing a lot of this information, and opening up the gates for people to have access to this information.
I think we've definitely gone through a lot of our stakeholders didn't trust what we were doing, either because they weren't familiar with research or because they had bad experiences with research. So that was a huge motivation for us as well to create the question bank, was because we know the value of research. We don't want anybody to run into the situation where their stakeholders just don't trust them. And we want people to get the best insights possible by running surveys or whatever, interviews, whatever you have to run, the best way. The show where I just woke up and didn't do my hair.
So we had a intern of sorts from the US come in, and he had made this suggestion that like, because we were basically advertising that like, you want to tailor fit like insurance, and insurance customized for you, right? So he said like, what about a guy in like a big baggy like suit that just didn't fit, right? And it was like not tailor made and not fit, right? So I was like, okay, let's do that, and then we ran that ad, and then it just wasn't performing for some reason. We were just like, it's super intelligent. Like even just now talking about it, sounds very smart, right? Tailor fit, like
it works.
that.
Yeah.
So we got to Hong Kong, and then we asked people, like, what do you think about like when you see this ad? Like it literally on the ad itself had like words for it, like that literally just means like tailor fit, like get a tailor fit like insurance, something like that. And then they said, "Oh, I thought it was a slimming product, like a dieting product."
Hey y'all! No. All right, 3 minutes. We got this.
And I think like situations actually get worse in the more rural places you go to. The less likely it is to sort of suspend this belief that like the current reality isn't real, and that there's a possibility for like brand new technology, and the Henry Ford thing of like asking your users about like a faster horse versus a car rings very, very true there. So yeah.
Yeah. I think even the asking about a faster horse, they'd be like, no, that's not possible. A horse is going to be slow. It's going to break down. And that's the way life is.
Okay. I think that's all for
Yeah. Bye, 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 bye.